are discussing the Villisca Axe Murder House. So the crazy thing about this case is it happened over 100 years ago. However, something happened more recently with this case or this house, and it's very odd. So let's dive right in. In the year 1912, the Moore family lived in Villisca, Iowa. Villisca is about 1 hour southeast of Omaha, Nebraska. In the Moore family, the father was Josiah and the mother's name was Sarah. Sarah and Josiah had 4 children, ranging from the age of 5 to 11, and their names were Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul. The Moore family did fairly well for themselves, and they lived in a nice home on 2nd Street, which was right near the downtown part of Villisca. On June the 9th in the year 1912, the Moore's daughter Mary invited 2 young girls from the Stillinger family named Ina May and Lena, and she invited the girls over to spend the night with them. The Stillinger parents agreed, and after the Stillinger girls arrived, both girls, along with all of the Moore family, attended a Children's Day program in Villisca. Now, this program was held at the Presbyterian Church in town, and Sarah Moore had even helped organize this event. The program ended that evening around 9:30 p.m., and the Moore family, along with the 2 Stillinger girls, chose to walk back home. Their house was only like a little ways away from the church. Like, it was not a far walk at all. So it was presumed that everyone arrived at the Moore's house no later than 10 p.m. that night. The next morning, on June the 10th, a neighbor named Mary Peckham went outside around 5 a.m. in the morning. Mary had gone out to hang up some laundry, and while Mary was out there, she noticed that between the hours of 5 and 7, no one exited from the Moore's household. This was very odd, as the Moores had chickens that were usually up fairly early in the morning and let out, and also the children had lots of different chores that they had to complete outside of the home on a regular basis, and Mary Peckham was just not seeing the kids outside at all. Around 7 in the morning, Mary was eventually arrested for the murders of the Moore family, and he even confessed to the police that he committed the crime. However, when he faced a jury, the jury did not believe him, and he was acquitted in 2 separate trials. The jury basically said that his confession was fake, and that due to his mental illness, ghost hunters from around America coming to observe to see if the house is truly haunted. The new owners claim that anyone who stays overnight there, pretty much all of them have experienced something weird and crazy. And now, whether or not the house is truly haunted is crazy enough. However, on November 7th in the year 2014, things took an even weirder turn. Completely crazy. So a man named Robert Larson Jr., he was 37 years old, and he visited the Villisca Axe Murder House. Now, Robert was attending one of those overnight stays at the house, and Robert attended this stay with just his mom and dad, I believe. Now, from what I've observed, I'm not sure if when you stay overnight, you can basically stay on your own, or if someone stays with you that kind of works there. I don't really know how that works out. But Robert arrived, and, he said, he was ready to kind of take on whatever the house brought to him that evening. At one point in time, Robert was alone inside of the house in a bedroom upstairs that belonged to the children, the Moore children. And Robert was alone up there with a knife, and he was attempting to do some solo investigation while his mom and dad were outside. The three of them had a couple of walkie-talkies between them, and he was trying to do some paranormal investigation. I don't think, that they had a camera on or anything. This was just for fun themselves. Robert, all of a sudden, who was alone in the bedroom, called for help over the walkie-talkie that he had. His parents came in, and there they found Robert had been stabbed in the chest. Of course, medics and the police were called, and they arrived rather quickly. The odd thing, though, about this is while Robert was alone in that bedroom, the police claimed that this was a self-inflicted stabbing and that no one else had been involved at all. They also claim that the stabbing did not appear to happen from a slip or a fall. Now, that's weird enough on its own. However, Robert did survive this attack, for lack of a better word. The stabbing had happened around 12:45 a.m., which is around approximately the time that the Moore family was, possibly killed that night. Now, the owner of the Villisca Axe House claims that Robert came back to the house one day. I guess he'd come along with some people filming, a paranormal investigation show. And while there, the owner asked Robert about the attack and what had happened. The owner asked why Robert had brought a knife with him. And Robert said that normally he would carry a concealed weapon on him just for safety. But since he wasn't from Iowa, he wasn't sure of the laws there. So instead of bringing a gun, he just brought a knife. Robert said he had been alone in the bedroom trying to provoke